In my last Forex Funds video, I told the story of a very similar situation that happened to me over 10 years ago. I had two of my accounts frozen, but I was able to get refunds of over $20,000. With everything that's going on, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty. People in the comments were wondering about refunds, if I thought they were going to happen, how long it might take, and what else they can do about it. I'm not a lawyer, a banker, or a fortune teller, but lately I've been researching this topic. In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 things that may give you a little comfort and hope for the future. I'm going to talk about what the Canadian and US governments are doing on your behalf. Number 2, what you can proactively be doing now that may help you get your money back sooner. And number 3, even a tax write-off you can use that'll save you money. As you may have seen, the Ontario Securities Commission issued a temporary cease trading order against Trading Global Group, which is my Forex Funds, owned by Kazmi. The OSC received assistance from the CFTC, which is the American counterpart. A complaint was also filed against Traders Group Global in the United States against Kazmi. This is the CFTC announcement it's referring to, which alleges Traders Group actively hurt its customers by creating false pretext determined accounts, misleadingly assessed commissions, and secretly executed at worse prices. Since 2021, $310 million in fees have been paid, some of which Kazmi has used to purchase cars, homes, and pad his personal accounts with tens of millions of dollars. I want to talk a couple minutes about what these agencies do and how it can help us in the My Forex Funds case. These regulatory bodies are responsible for a number of things, including compliance, and where we become interested, market integrity and investor protection. These agencies have enforcement privileges to not only issue cease and desist orders and pursue criminal charges, but also impose fines, freeze and recover assets. Along with this, they can also issue restitution orders, which require the wrongdoer to repay money gained through fraudulent activities. The Ontario Securities Commission is one of many Canadian organizations that has cooperation agreements with the United States SEC. Because financial markets often intersect across borders, the SEC and OSC share information and assist one another. For example, the OSC and SEC work together on a crypto case. Once again, it says the OSC and SEC have a long history of collaboration. Kick Interactive was based in Ontario, which falls under the OSC jurisdiction, and along with the SEC, they were able to get a permanent injunction as well as a $5 million penalty. It's likely Kazmi will face criminal charges, which is well and good, but what we're really interested in is money back in our pocket in the form of recovered assets. Let's look at 2 cases where this was successful. Alan Stanford was a banker and a smooth talker. It turns out he ran one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in American history.
Is it fun being a billionaire?
Well, yes. I have to say it is fun being a billionaire, but it's hard work.
But as they say, behind every great fortune is a great crime. In 2009, when the Stanford Bank collapsed, Kathleen and thousands of others lost their money, and a U.S. judge called Alan Stanford's operation one of the most egregious criminal frauds ever presented to a trial jury in federal court. His arrest meant the end of almost 2 decades of illegal financial activity.
Essentially, what he was doing was selling certificates of deposit to investors, promising a safe return. In reality, he was using part of the money to fund his lavish lifestyle and part of the new investor money to pay off the old investors.
To keep the scheme alive, those billions needed to move from Stanford's clients in the U.S. and South America to accounts controlled by Alan Stanford. To do that, he needed a big bank. For that, Stanford used the same bank 12 million customers across Canada use.
The market crashed. Not enough new money was flowing in. Exiting investors wanted their money back, and the house of cards fell. However, all of this money was not lost. The US and Canadian governments worked together. Here's Stanford, who was sentenced to a 110-year prison sentence. 3 monetary settlements have been reached. TD Bank will pay more than $1.2 billion. HSBC will pay $40 million and Independent Bank Group will pay $100 million. In total, investors will recoup $1.6 billion from these banks who are part of the fraud. The money didn't go into the government's pocket. It was used to refund part of the loss that investors suffered. Now, around the same time, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time was discovered. I'm sure you've heard the name Bernie Madoff, a former chairman of the NASDAQ. He had thousands of clients, including hedge funds and royal families all across the globe.
I said, what happens if you've got all your eggs with Bernie and he is a fraud? And Teray says, he can't be. I've got all my money with him. I've got most of my family's money with him.
The market went up, the market went down. It didn't matter for his investors. Returns were always good. He claimed he had a proprietary trading model, but questions began to arise at how he was able to be so consistent.
People being completely inept.
Linda Thompson, the SEC's chief of enforcement, and one other on this panel were forced out. When the housing bubble burst in the spring of '07 and markets collapsed, hedge funds were hurting.
In October, it's the worst market we've seen in, maybe 70 years. But Bernie's still making money. And why would you invest in the equities markets when you could put a substantial portion of your monies into this fund that's generating very consistent returns even in this down market? So it was very appealing to the investors. If anything, people wanted to get money out of the equities markets and move it more into Bernie because he's the only one making money, consistent money in this marketplace.
The scary thing about Bernie is how good he was at hiding it. He was investigated by the SEC numerous times. And had it not been for the financial crisis of 2007, it's most likely he'd never be discovered.
The fact is, he easily could have gone through his life without this being found out. The only reason that this ended was because at one given point in time, the economy did so badly that people needed to get money out of Madoff's investments.
And similar to the last case, this Ponzi scheme had great returns, kept attracting more and more money until the financial crisis hit. People started withdrawing their money, and he couldn't stop the bleeding.
On December 11th, the morning after Madoff had allegedly confessed to his sons, the FBI knocked on his door and asked if there was an innocent explanation. Madoff said no. It was, quote, one big lie.
Bernie Madoff died in prison a couple years ago, and more important, with the help of government intervention, 14 distributions have been made to the victims of the Ponzi scheme, totaling more than $14 billion. This amount equals 70% of all claims. So far, we've seen that American and Canadian governments often work together in these financial cases. They have the power to not only go after someone criminally, but can also claw back money and return it to the victims. Madoff pleaded guilty in 2009, but with such a large sum of money, even to this very year, victims are still being paid. So it's by no means an overnight process. What does that mean for my Forex funds? One thing I can say for sure, this is not a new case for the US and Canadian governments. The article we read at the beginning of the video mentioned Kazmi used money to fund luxury homes and car purchases, as well as tens of millions of dollars transferred to his personal accounts. The last thing the government wants is for him to start feeling the heat and then hide his money somewhere. In these financial crimes, governments do their due diligence first and then make their move. I'm confident he left a paper trail. Of course, the governments have the authority to press criminal charges, but they also have the resources to follow the money, freeze the assets, and then return the money to the victims of this Ponzi scheme. As far as the time frame, however long it takes, I'm sure it'll be longer than any of us want. In my personal experience I shared with you in the last video, one account took 3 months and the other took a year for me to get my money back. In my case, it was more of a regulation thing than a criminal Ponzi scheme. So it may take longer than a year for the authorities to unravel everything. I'd say there is comfort in knowing the government can and will do something, but there's also uncertainty in not knowing what percentage will be returned and how long it'll take. With that said, there's 2 proactive things you can do right now to help yourself, and I want to get into that now. But before I do, if you could do me one favor. In my last video, I went over 7 prop firms and broke them down by where they're registered. I got many thoughts from subscribers suggesting other firms to check out. One person also mentioned I should look into which broker they use. I want to thank everyone for their thoughts. Please, if there's a prop firm you have experience with, either good or bad, leave your feedback in the comments below. I'll put together a follow-up video with other prop firms that may be good options. Okay, now let's look at 2 ways you might be able to help yourself out faster than the government can. The first method is trying to get a charge back from your credit or debit card. I'm not an expert and the policies vary by country, but I'll share with you what I found. Each region has their own rules. The most clear-cut procedures come out of the UK. This article talks about Forex fraud and the chargeback procedure. The chargeback is paid by the bank that issued the card under section of the Consumer Credit Act of 1974, which deals with breaches of the supplier. You contact the credit or debit card to request the chargeback. It can cover one or multiple transactions with the company, and then the bank will investigate. Covered charges can range anywhere from £100 to £30,000, but you have to reach out to them within 120 days. Make no mistake about it, the way my Forex funds ran their business was a complete fraud. You may have used a credit card to pay for it, but when you read the laws about credit card fraud and the protections they offer, what often falls under that umbrella are a different type of class. They typically have in mind identity theft. If a website gets hacked, your credit card info gets stolen, you click on the link and are a victim of phishing scam, someone spoofs your credit card at a restaurant, they get a hold of your PIN number, or you get tricked on Craigslist with a fake cashier's check. These types of cases are often cut and dry, and the bank is willing to work with you. I think we can all agree if someone steals your credit card, goes down to the gas station and fills up their tank, this is something you did not authorize. My main concern in our case is some organizations have very restrictive language, and that's what we're dealing with here. I think the biggest obstacle we may face in a quick refund from the bank is how some of them define unauthorized transaction. Here it refers to an unauthorized transaction as a charge or withdrawal you didn't make or allow. So this puts it in a whole other category than when someone steals your credit card or a website gets hacked. The trader willingly and knowingly authorized the actual purchase. Now, I understand we didn't get the service that was advertised, and that's a separate issue. But any money that falls under the fraud protection comes out of the bank's pocket if they can't reach back to the fraudulent company and reverse the charges. Those funds are currently frozen from what I understand, so it adds a layer of complexity. It seems to me we're facing an uphill battle disputing the charges with your bank. but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and get a chargeback. This is how you can go about it. Gather your documentation, receipts, emails, maybe the news article I'll link below. Call the phone number on the back of your credit or debit card. Initiate the dispute verbally. Explain to them what's going on. Provide them with a date of the transaction, the amount, etc. They may require you to fill out a form or submit a letter in writing. I'll put a template on the screen now. Pause the video and you can read it. If you paid with a debit card, federal law requires banks to investigate the disputed charges within 10 days of receiving the complaint, and it usually takes up to 45 days to complete the investigation. If you paid with a credit card, the bank has a total of 90 days, 30 to acknowledge the dispute and another 60 to investigate. If they need more information from you, you have 10 days to respond. So far, we've talked about the government getting involved. They do have a successful track record of freezing assets and distributing money to victims, but it's a slow process. In the meantime, you can contact your bank and you'll probably have an answer back within 2 to 3 months. There is one more thing you can do, and that's a tax write-off. The IRS made a special provision where Ponzi scheme victims can deduct losses from their income taxes. Normally, capital gain losses are limited to $3,000, but in this special case, there's no limit, and you can use the credit if you want to amend a tax return you submitted up to 3 years ago, or you can save the credit and use it up to 20 years in the future. Part 1 deals with losses from criminal fraud, and this next part deals with arrangements that were discovered to be criminally fraudulent. I'll leave a link in the description below. Consult with an accountant if that applies to you. This is an unfortunate situation that's financially hurt many people, but there's a chance monetary compensation could come through a credit card chargeback, a tax deduction, or an eventual government refund. My Forex fund was a bad apple, and it certainly hurt the overall industry's reputation. But there are many good companies out there. In upcoming video, we'll go over your suggestions for alternative prop firms, so make sure to drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't seen it already, check out my video where I go over 10 ways to become a better trader by clicking here. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll talk to you soon.